So is there any questions? Anybody who would like to ask like a question, or who has something to like share? Okay. Nobody has any questions or want to share anything. If you don't want to speak up, you can also type it in the chat box, or you can type it in the chat box privately to me.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Makiko.
Hi, thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome.
I have a question. I have nothing to share about inner child so far, but is there any physical symptoms that you can recognize that you have issues?
Okay, with the inner child, yes.
Yes.
So for example, a lot of people who have like a wounded inner child, they find that when it comes to certain situations, they tend to have physical symptoms, usually to do with the digestive system. So for example, like some people experience like a massive like stomach ache when they are triggered like by the inner child, and this can come from like nowhere, and it's not because okay you're going to have diarrhea or anything. So they just have an ache, and somehow when the trigger has passed, like the ache goes away. That's one. Then some other people who actually have issues with their fathers. So if like the issue in your childhood, or your wounded inner child is due largely to your father, you tend to actually find that you will have issues with your jaw. So I have had several clients whereby they have really stiff jaws, and then when we trace the energy back, we realize that it's because they have issues with their fathers in childhood, and even that, even like at that present moment, the relationship with their father is still not good, and so they have this sort of like problem. Okay. And then another sort of like issue with with a wounded sort of like inner child is that uh some people tend to get really nervous and literally like sweat like a lot when it comes to certain situations that require them to be more confident or to stand up. So like, for example, going out on stage, most people, let's say public speaking, most people experience normal reactions like butterflies in the stomach, which is quite normal, like when you're like nervous and everything. But if somebody has a wounded inner child, confidence is a big issue for them, and they will experience symptoms whereby they kind of like shake, or they are literally sweating a lot on the palms and like the feet. Yeah. And one of the also really common like and I would classify this as a physical like and mental like symptom is selective amnesia. So people who have a wounded sort of like inner child have parts of memory of their childhood, sometimes spanning over a few years or 1 year period or something, where they can remember nothing. So the memory is just like gone. They can't remember the good nor the bad and everything. And normally when we facilitate and work on them and they finally manage to recover the memory, it's usually linked to some kind of emotional trauma, which could have been imposed on them, not just by the parents, but also by like circumstances like around them. So for example, like failing an exam and being sort of like screamed at by your father, or being called and stupid and humiliated or something. So some people, when they are deeply like traumatized, they actually have selective amnesia. And what's interesting is that we're not sometimes talking about like very serious like abuse and things like that, because it really depends on the sensitivity of the child. So if you are a sensitive child, then your parents are, for example, just shouting at you like one time, even though they've never like shouted at you, and shouted at you one time could actually become a point of trauma for you. Yeah. So because a lot of people think that, oh, it's like, trauma can only happen if you've been like physically and mentally or psychologically like abused, but it's not so, because it also depends on the sensitivity of like the child. Yeah. So I think those are some of the physical symptoms so far that I've like observed. So I hope that answered like your question. Mm.
Sure. Thank you. I couldn't hear the first one because my internet connection
Okay.
was not great. But
Mm,
the second one, when you mentioned about the jaw, is that
mm,
something, grinding teeth is a kind of the phenomenon that
mm.
has something to do with the inner child?
So not so much the grinding of the teeth, but because the grinding of the teeth usually we find is more linked to frustration and like anger. But usually people who have issues with their fathers, they have kind of like stiff jaw, or they have really tight jaws, or the joint, between the jaws have like a little bit of like a problem. It's like, like how you open and close like your mouth, right? So sometimes they have like, oh yeah, it's called lockjaw. Sometimes they have a lockjaw. Yeah. Mm.
Right.
And I
Okay.
think
Thank you very much.
I think the first one you missed was the digestive system. So like they would have a
Yeah.
stomach ache. You're like, but it's not because like they need to go like to the washroom or anything. Yeah, and sometimes like that ache, even if they go to the washroom, like it doesn't get right resolved. Yeah. Okay.
Right. That's
Thank you,
fascinating. That's
Makiko.
interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Victoria is asking, how can we gauge that our inner child has healed or is healing or on the road like of healing? Are there cases where the inner child is never healed or very hard to heal? Okay, um, there are cases where the inner child is never healed, okay, but that's usually because no attention is paid like to the inner child. So for example, if you don't even want to acknowledge your inner child, and you say, I want nothing to do with my inner child, the past is the past, I want to bury it, then your inner child will never heal. Okay. Uh if the As for being very hard to heal, yes, there are some cases whereby they have suffered like, you know physical abuse when they're kids, or like they have been, involved in violent incidents like kidnapping or like war, um or other, or like families being murdered and everything. In those cases, yes, the inner child is very hard to heal, but it's not impossible to heal, because so long as you start the process, it's just a matter of time, uh that you heal the sort of like inner child. But of course it needs like consistency. So it's very much like, okay, if you have a weak constitution, you can rebuild up your constitution, because the human sort of like will and ability to regenerate is actually amazing, and that doesn't apply just physically, it also apply emotionally and like mentally. Okay, so if you actually start on the road like to healing, and you keep at it, you would definitely be able to heal your inner child. Okay. As for how can you gauge like if your inner child has healed or is healing or is on the road to healing, the moment you start the process, you are healing and on the road like of healing. Okay. But to know when the inner child is completely healed, uh that needs to I feel like, okay, that actually needs uh to you need to observe yourself in the present sort of like time. Okay. So in the present, if you find that you are very clear about your identity, okay, you're very confident, Okay, you have strong purpose like in your life, and you are able to experience the whole gamut of like emotions, um, and you're able to allow yourself like to enjoy and to feel like you deserve the enjoyment like of your life, then very likely your inner child has healed. Mm, yeah. So I hope that answers like your question, Victoria. Okay. Is there any other like questions that uh anybody else would like to ask? I think one of the interesting like questions that I had like recently about the inner child is there more than one inner child? Okay, and the answer is yes. Okay, because for example, there are some people when they go into their psyche and their subconscious, they realize that the inner child has actually split into um a few personas. Okay, so for example, there is a happy, healthy inner child, and this is the inner child that is like playful and like creative and engaging. Okay, and then they find that there is another sort of like vulnerable inner child. So this is the inner child that's a little bit scared, a little bit suspicious and wary of us, and that may not actually sort of really kind of uh interact like with us or engage us until they become more familiar with us. Okay, and then there is often like an angry inner child, and this is the inner child that holds some of the very strong like negative emotions that we have experienced like as a child. Okay, so if you were to connect with your inner child and find that not one not just one inner child appears but actually several, don't be surprised, because sometimes due to the degree of trauma in certain events, you you actually may have a variety or a few sort of inner child like popping up for you. Okay, because it takes on the intensity of that moment. Okay. Okay, so Edward asks, how long does it take on average for the inner child to heal? Okay. So I would say that if you are consistently working on the inner child, and you do the recommended like exercises diligently, um, you would take between 3 to 6 months to heal your inner child. Okay, and but I would, but sometimes it may not be 100%, but we would be aiming for something like 90%. Okay, so 3 to 6 months if you are consistent and you're putting like what you learn like into practice and you're doing the exercises like recommended, 3 to 6 months is usually enough for you to heal like your inner child. Yeah, I hope that answers your question, like Edward. Okay. Now, is there any other sort of like questions that
It's me again.
yes, hi Makiko. Yes, okay.
Hi again, sorry. I have one more question. If people have some issues with inner child,
Mm,
uh, the energy of the human fields, let's say chakra, is it does it tend to be is it tend to be blocked or to open, or what kind of imbalances that people would experience?
mm. Okay, so that's a very good like question. So basically, it depends also on what kind of trauma they experience when they were a kid. So what I've observed is for those who, for example, in childhood they have been rejected or abandoned, especially for example like orphans or like people who have been adopted and all. I often notice that there are two chakras that are out of balance is the root chakra as well as the solar plexus chakra. So the root chakra is because when they were a kid, and before like 18 months, when they are developing like trust and the feeling of safety and security, they were actually not given like that. So because of that, no matter how good their current circumstance is, there's always a feeling of like insecurity, like they could lose like what they currently have like anytime, you know. So that, and that creates like an imbalance like in the root chakra. And then as for like the solar plexus, that's our emotion control like center. So what happens is that if you have been like rejected as a child, or you have felt like you were like ostracized or isolated, or and you have had trauma, then you will start to lose confidence of yourself as a person, of your own like identity. And when that actually happens, your solar plexus, which is like where like your stomach and everything is, would actually become like really out of balance. Okay, so that also correlates with the physical symptom of like having digestive system issues. Yeah, because the solar plexus is very close to like our digestive system, because it's where the sternum is, so it's like close to like the stomach and everything. So because of that, most people who have that kind of trauma in childhood tend to have these two like these two chakras like shut down. Then those who actually have experienced like um in terms of like trauma in their childhood, uh like lack of nurturing or love, or not being held and hugged and kissed by their parents and all, a lot of times what happens is that the heart and higher heart is out of balance. So they are unable to effectively open themselves up to receive love, and they are also unable to emote and express like love like properly, you know. So if this child actually has all four sort of like chakras like out of balance, then they would they end up displaying behavior uh like people pleasing, like they try to accommodate a lot of the people like around them at the detriment of their own interests. Okay, or they overgive and they sacrifice themselves because they feel like if they do that, then they can like get some like love like back for themselves, you know. And what this like does is then it leads to what I discussed just now about like the signs, which is like not being able to have like good relationships like with people, because you just don't actually know how a proper balanced relationship functions. Yeah. So in a lot of cases, like people with wounded inner child end up having codependent like relationships with their spouse or their partners, or sometimes even like with friends, such that there is like huge like impact on them if somebody sort of like leaves them, because then it triggers that abandonment and rejection sort of like a mood like in them. And then it can be extremely stressful. And there have been certain people who, if they had undergone like very deep trauma at a young age, this kind of like a stress and rejection can literally result in some kind of a mental or physical breakdown. Yeah. So that's I think so those are so far the most common chakras that I have observed in a wounded like inner child. Yeah.
Well,
So
it sounds as if, all of us or majority of us have inner child issues,
you're
depending whatever the
y-
degree.
yeah, that's actually true. But the thing is that I think, as you said, like different degrees. So for some, it's sometimes just an acknowledgement of the inner child can resolve a lot of things. Then for those who have deeper wounds, then you need to really sort of like work on it. Yeah. But it is true that most of us have had uh like some wound in the inner child. It's just like as a kid, it's literally impossible not to get injured. But it's just whether did you get a scratch and a scar, or did you like break something. So that's like different degrees. So I think it is fairly common. But if there is not a lot of like trauma and wounds, by acknowledging and connecting with your inner child, you very quickly adjust, and through like nurturing your inner child, you're able to completely heal. But most people, when they come and seek help, is because there is a degree of wound and trauma in the inner child which they themselves cannot resolve. But otherwise, for some of us, where we have fairly sort of like healthy sort of like an inner child with some wounds, actually organically we might even be able to like heal on our own. Yeah. Okay. Thank
Okay,
you,
thank
Makiko.
you.
Thank you, Makiko, for asking that question. That was a very good question. Okay. So, are there any more questions? If there's no more questions, I think we'll call it a night today. And yeah, okay. So anyway, thank you everybody for joining us for Psychic Circle like tonight. We will be posting the presentation about the inner child on YouTube, and there is actually a radio inner child like meditation on YouTube if you want to start connecting with your own inner child. And as usual, if there's anything that you need, please remember, like you can WhatsApp us and like share with us your feedback. And also, if you have any specific questions that you're not comfortable sharing here and asking, you can actually sort of WhatsApp us. Okay. So thank you very much, everyone, for turning up tonight. So have a good night, and we will see everybody soon at the next Psychic Circle in September. Okay. Bye, everybody.